Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar event. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kayla Sue, and I will be guiding our conversation today around navigating grief and loss at home and at work. Before I introduce you to our guests today, I will go through a few housekeeping items. So first, all attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of today's webinar event. If you have any comments or questions, please submit those. Submit those in the questions or chat box that's located in the right-hand side of your menu, typically in the Go-To Webinar Control panel. Again, usually the top right-hand side of your screen. And any resources, presentation slides can be accessed, again, from that Go-To Webinar Control panel under the Handouts section. All right, and to introduce our guest today, first we're joined by Justin, who is a former second grade teacher, turned salesperson, turned sales leader, turned first-time startup CEO at Bereave. So he battles self-doubt, is getting better at asking for help, and loves helping people see the greatness in themselves that they often can't see on their own. He thrives in opportunities to act and is driven by leaving things better than he found them. That's wonderful. Thanks for joining us, Justin.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm also joined today by my Kinetiq Health colleague, Andrea, who provides mental health case management services to employers in workplace settings. She collaborates with a multidisciplinary wellness team to deliver comprehensive care, including mental health assessments, crisis intervention, treatment planning, and both individual and group therapy. As a licensed clinical social worker, her experience spans school social work, acute and long-term mental health treatment, and macro-level practice. So for today's topic, grief, we know that grief is an emotional and physical reaction to a major loss. It's not just limited to death, but however, for today's conversation, we will focus on grief from a loss of a loved one. And so many of us, we have experienced loss while we're still expected to show up for work, to show up for our family, and all of the responsibilities that are still there. And so this topic touches nearly everyone, or it will at some point in their lives, but it's rarely something that we do talk about openly, especially in professional settings. So happy to kind of bring this conversation to light. Yeah. So given that it's something we typically don't talk about, wondering, Justin, if you would like to speak to how does grief usually show up in the workplace?
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't, in a lot of respects. But when it does, it can show up in all those kind of the feelings of those photos that we're moving through here. All of those are emotions that you might see occur in the workplace, driven by grief. But there's a whole other non-feeling, non-health side of this, is the business side, right? You start to see things like change in productivity. You start to see things like absenteeism or presenteeism emerge. You start to see things like retention problems can all be driven by grief and the symptoms that occur throughout somebody's grief journey.
Yeah, agree. Because some people may be more open to sharing loss, while you mentioned sometimes there are no signs. From your perspective as a licensed clinical social worker and doing especially individual therapy too, how do you typically see those signs of grief show up?
Well, again, something that I think is important is that we train managers and people in the workforce to know what are some signs and symptoms to look out for that a person might be struggling in general, right? But to Justin's point, yeah, it could not show up. And a lot of people, grief is a very deeply personal, sensitive topic. And so they might not disclose those things that they're going through. But if we're able to notice change in patterns of behavior of the people that we work with, our coworkers, our people that we might manage, we might be able to see if they're struggling in general. And maybe it's not about grief, but it's good to recognize signs of struggling employees in general. So I definitely think that one of the biggest takeaways of how I see it showing up is just people struggling with their mental health and well-being in general. And like Justin mentioned, you might see changes in behaviors, changes in productivity at work, or absenteeism, presenteeism, all that stuff that he already mentioned. But the only way you're going to notice those things is if you're able to really know the people that you work with and see those patterns
and have a relationship with
yeah.
them. Yeah.
I think there's a component of like of knowing what to do when you do know that somebody is going through these moments, but also kind of assuming, just looking at just public health data, just assuming that your workforce population is going to be going through some moments of grief at some point during the year. Right?
Yeah, I read a stat. It said 1 in 3 Americans will experience a loss.
Yeah, and so just making that assumption and being able to provide resources, a limited amount of training, right? You don't want you're not asking your managers to become grief counselors.
No. We don't want them to be. Right.
But even training them, to Andrea's point, on signs to look for, and it doesn't have to be grief driven, but it could be mental health signs, some sort of manager, mental health toolkit that is not just trained on early, but also a regular part of the cultural conversation at the office.
And that makes it not weird by having it be something regular that you talk about. It's not like the big elephant in the room. We all know that someone experienced a loss, so now we're putting out this information, so it feels kind of targeted versus it just feels a part of the culture, like you said.
Totally. And I've been lucky enough to experience some of that stuff top down. And I think most of the folks here are probably in Indiana-based. I used to work for an Indiana-based company called Lessonly. And the leaders of that company talked about their therapy journey on a pretty regular basis, like just very openly that they go to therapy, right?
You support that.
And so what you saw was calendars blocked out that used to be private. Those started to become unlocked, right? And people said, hey, have therapy, this is a non-negotiable time. Started talking about it. We started protecting it for each other, and really started acknowledging the importance to it. And I think the same thing can happen with any difficult life topic that can be driven by leadership at work, to start making it more of the culture, which then hopefully bleeds into society a little bit more, and we become a little bit more attuned to having those conversations outside of the workplace, but really driven by company leadership in a lot of respects.
That's a great way to change the norms. And it's something so small as to just kind of be open that you're going through that, even with making it not a private event on your calendar. Even that's small, and it's passive, but it's a really great starting place too.
Yeah, and not to say that everybody should unlock those things, but the point that you are safe in doing so. When the CEO of a company says, I go to therapy at 2:30 on Thursdays every week, it's like, oh, that's during the work week, during the work day, and if they are doing it, I can probably do it too, right? So just creating that element of safety initially, so that people can make the decision whether or not to open it up and to talk about it. At least they have the opportunity if they want to.
Yeah, that's really great. I know you had mentioned there's some, like, a change of pattern in absenteeism or presenteeism, kind of those negative effects, I guess, from the workplace perspective of employees who are going through grief that may not be supported or treated. For those of us that do notice something, so maybe or maybe it's shared, we get that dreadful news that, hey, a coworker has lost someone. This actually just happened with us. We found out a coworker, unexpectedly lost a parent. And so how can we show our support? I feel, even if it's someone might have received terrible health news too, like a bad diagnosis. So how, as a coworker, can we show our support without making it awkward? Oftentimes people come in and you don't want to, you want to address the elephant in the room, but then you don't want to, if I bring it up, then they're going to cry or get upset, or, I don't know what to do. So how would you suggest that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a million variables to this question.
Loaded question, yes.
Right. But I think kind of when you back up and you think about the fact that we're working with humans every day, we're dealing with humans, that there are going to be human things that happen to them outside of work, and they are going to bring those things to work, and we have to be ready to provide some levels of support. I think, like, very specifically, saying nothing is the absolute wrong move, right? The people that have told us and time and time again, the stories that we hear from very generous people sharing their very personal stories, people often feel incredibly alone and alienated.
Yeah.
Because people that they used to talk to and used to joke with see them down the hall walking towards them and start to veer off in other directions, right?
They don't know what to say.
Right.
They feel uncomfortable, yeah.
Yes.
Or they show up to a meeting and it's business as usual and nobody acknowledges it, right? So when you back up and think about maybe not the specifics of what to say, and we can talk about that certainly, but I think there's a bigger picture here is really understanding as an organization, how do you want to show up in times of hardship for your employees? Write those things down, create a plan, and share that plan with employees to set expectations of when life struggles occur. This is how we are going to show up for you. Here are the resources that are available to you. Here's how we're going to cover work when you're out. Here's the expectation on targets or quotas or projects or all of those things, and just make that a part of how you go about the day-to-day, so that when people do suffer those situations, they don't have to worry about like what's happening at work.
They're not scrambling to know what's the leave policy or looking to see, how do I reach out for help?
Yeah. And having that plan and communicating that plan can really make or break that employee experience. And to Andrea's point, the second layer of that is making sure you've got managers who are trained on what to do in these moments. Again, not trying to become grief counselors, but what do they do? Who do they contact? Do they have discretion? Do they have budget to maybe help with meals or flowers or whatever they want to do as an organization? But having the plan, training managers on it so that you can show up in the right ways starts to really impact that productivity down the line. It starts to impact retention. We did a survey last year. 51% of people who suffered a close loss while employed left their job within 12 months. And I guarantee you that exit interviews aren't catching those drivers in the way that maybe they might in other departures. So really it just comes back to having a plan, communicating the plan, training your managers, setting the right expectations, and things should start to become a little bit less uncomfortable. They're always going to be somewhat uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
But making it less uncomfortable can really change the trajectory of that employee experience.
Right. Yeah. And I think that goes back to like what we said, leading from the top down. It's how managers present things. And if they have a plan and they're able to present that to the other people on the team, again, there's a plan in place. We're not feeling uncomfortable because, I mean, yes, to your point, there might still be a little bit of feelings of this is uncomfortable, but we are also humans. And so we are also struggling with how do we manage these difficult situations? That's normal, that's natural. But if leadership is able to say, hey, let's do X, Y, and Z to help support this employee, that makes it easy. And I know that our team does a great job of that. If one of us is going through something personally, I personally have had our team put together gift cards or care packages for me when I've had things going on with my kids and stuff like that. So I think that having a team that communicates and is able to just have a protocol in place makes employees feel seen. So I think that's a great.
I love that word protocol too. I mean,
right.
There are situations like yours, and Apex is probably small enough where that is probably pretty tightly woven in the culture.
Right.
Yes.
As you start to grow, that becomes kind of isolated to certain organizations, certain teams specifically. And I think when you start to look at the culture as a whole and how kind of micro cultures emerge in smaller teams, you still have to, as an organization, as a company, you still have to make sure that everybody is getting some level of the similar type of response. Because if one manager does one thing for somebody and the next doesn't, we not only have
that loss bigger? Was that
right? We not only have an employee experience issue, but we also now are starting to bump into some legal ramifications as well.
That's a really good point.
And I would add too, you've said come up with a plan, or they can brainstorm what do you want to do for employees. Maybe on the reverse end for employees that we survey, we get surveyed so many times throughout the year, but that can be a really great place to say, hey, I think we're missing this, or this would be something that I think would be helpful or have been helpful when I've seen other people experience loss, or if I experience a loss earlier in the year, that it would have made me feel supported to give that feedback too. But again, you need a culture where you're open to that.
Right.
Maybe it's a way to be anonymous too. It has to be, you know, in a way where you don't feel like there would be any retaliation for giving that as well.
Right. And I think, so something that we do here within our culture is we have a safe persons program. And that's something where it's employees that are not in management or leadership, and they're not counselors, they're not therapists, obviously, but we are trained individuals who are recognized to know the resources that we have available to us at Apex and Kinetiq Health. So within that, if an employee is struggling with more sensitive topic that they don't feel comfortable going to their manager about, they can go to a safe person, and the safe person can walk them through the bereavement leave, for instance, or how to navigate the employee assistance program. So I think another thing that employers could do is finding ways for employees to have those safe outlets, even if it's not within management, because sometimes it's not going to be within management. You know.
I am curious. Can I ask a question about that? You've got a lot of people here that are, they've got some credentials and some titles that probably would lean a little bit more to that safe person profile. What about companies that don't? Right? What if it's a traditional company? You've got a sales team and a marketing team and a product team and a delivery team. You've got all those teams. How do you identify, like, what are the characteristics of somebody who might be a quote unquote safe person? And how do you keep them a safe person?
Yeah, so it's a completely voluntary program. It's something that, as I do lead up, and I do obviously have the credentials for that, so there is a little bit of a bias there of having a mental health clinician. However, the majority of safe people on our team are people that do not have that mental health background, and so it was completely first voluntary. They signed up, had interest in just being a supportive listening ear for employees. Then there was a process that went through manager approval to make sure that the manager feels it's a good fit, that they have the capacity within their workload. And then there was training that went into it. So they had to go through a safe persons training led by myself, where we went through, again, signs and symptoms to look out for, how to navigate people to resources, how to have difficult conversations. And then there's the piece of confidentiality. So can you handle hearing information and keeping that confidential? What are the protocols if it does need to go to HR? How do we handle that? So having all those levels in place would be the first thing, is having that clearly laid out. And then another thing that I do is quarterly we check in with safe people to say, how are you doing? Are you going through a difficult season in your life? Because even myself as a mental health clinician, I could be going through a really difficult season in my life where I can't show up for other people in the way I need to. And if that's the case, then we allow safe people to say, I'm going to take a step back at this time. We can come back to the program when we need to, but to ensure that they're at a place where they can show up when people need them.
That's great.
And it's great that it's a full team, not just one person. Because if that one safe person is out, then who can people reach out to? So that's really great. We've kind of skimmed over the term bereavement policy, so that organizations may have if someone has experienced a loss. And so Justin, since you do work with multiple different companies, employer groups, on that side of supporting their employees for bereavement leave and bereavement in general, what do you say? I mean, do typically the employers you work with that come to you, do they already have a policy in place?
Usually.
Okay. And if so, what's the standard kind of leave?
We could get to that. So just to kind of level set, like we are not a policy company. We are a support company. We are helping companies transition what is typically called bereavement leave, and actually helping companies define it past time off, right? It's got to be more about time off. People need support in these moments. They need to know where to turn. Their managers need to know how to what to consider. The HR team needs to know what to consider. So even if they have what we view as a pretty bad policy, that policy is just one piece to the puzzle. How you really put the playbooks in for the rest of that employee experience becomes critical. And that's the piece that most companies, and I say most, and I mean darn close to all companies that we talk to, are missing. But most of the companies that come to us are saying like, hey, we've got a what we think is an okay policy. We could probably work on that. But it feels like we could be doing more in these moments, but we don't know how.
Yeah.
That's where we have the luxury of being able to show up for those customers, and help create those playbooks and those paths for their employees. When you think about policy in general, we get asked a lot about policy, and we can point to things that are probably a little bit more progressive than the norm, and that's typically kind of what we would push and recommend. I think we spend a ton of time as company leaders sometimes trying to determine how important certain relationships are to certain people, and that are very blanket statements when you roll those out, right? Almost assigning in some way, the amount of love that somebody has for somebody through some time, right?
Yeah, because typically I've seen kind of the strictest, like 2 days, they must be immediate family, like mom or dad, and maybe the person that raised you isn't blood relative, but you consider them to be a father figure, but there's not technically time off for that.
Most of the policies that we see do consider what I would refer to as traditional family structures, right? We are starting to see more and more that are more representative of what I would call modern family dynamics, that some of them don't even mention specific relationships. They say, you love who you love. It's not our job to tell you who you love and how much. And this is how we handle bereavement here. The standards, and we get asked a lot about this, especially from trusted, it might be a benefits broker, it might be somebody who is holding an advisory position at a company. They come to us and they say, hey, what are the standards? What are the benchmarks? And frankly, I won't share them because they suck, right? Pardon my language. But they're so bad in actually recognizing life, and they're so focused on what I would probably refer to as compliance in that moment. And really protecting the business from the employees, rather than really supporting the employees. We usually don't. You
don't want people to think they're doing well at 3 days because the benchmark is 2, but the benchmark is very poor.
Exactly. So what we typically do is we take 3 or 4 examples from other companies that have either what we refer to as compassionate leave policies or empathetic leave policies, empathy leave policies, and really kind of coach them to get as close to as they can to that. And it's probably not a flip of the switch, but there are considerations that can be made around things like thinking outside of the bloodlines, right? About non-consecutive leave, making sure that you understand there's a funeral, but people might need time later as well. So there are a few things that we like to point to and help companies really think through, but people can become customers and provide really great support. You don't have to become a customer. You can provide really great support and still have a pretty crummy policy that sometimes takes a year and a half, 2 years to actually change.
To get that modified. I know something that your company does do is kind of have that checklist to provide to leaders and to just employees, what to do when experiencing a loss, what it might be like, closing estates and things like that. And again, that's not just the funeral or immediately afterwards, that might come weeks, months later, that they need time off for that, or guidance on, what to do for maybe the sole beneficiary, and they need to sell this house. And so
when we were building this company, we did hundreds of interviews with people who have experienced a loss while employed, and there were 2 common themes, and this is kind of what we built around, but also what companies can build around without us. One is people said when they lost their person, they didn't know where to turn, right? They end up maybe going to a funeral home and maybe getting some guidance there, like sometimes going to a stranger for that. And the other thing is that they said, they told us about their manager, and they told us about what their employer did, and they told us about the employee experience. And we did not ask for that. That just emerged from the conversations. So the very clear path for us to build and make the most impact the fastest was to build that place to go for employees, and secondarily help companies understand the considerations that they should be making every single time, whether
Yeah.
they do them or not. It might not be appropriate, may or may not be appropriate, but making sure that those two things can really impact that employee experience for things like retention, productivity, reputation, brand
Yes.
management, all of those types of things.
Maybe a company that you want to work for. I know when we were talking about today's webinar, we were kind of wondering, well, what is our policy? It's not something I think that we regularly share other than maybe during open enrollment or when you first get hired on, but it is something that is accessible to look at. And I was kind of surprised. I know there was something about for an animal, for the loss of a pet, that we do give just 1 day, which I would argue, it could, again, the loss of the feelings are going to be there past that 1 day, but that's not something that you typically see in employer leave policies. Yeah.
Well, and I'll say, so a couple of things when I was reviewing our policy particular, is that they cover, yes, 1 day for a pet, and then also for miscarriages, which I know I talked with you about as well, that Bereave helps to support. And I think that that is something I didn't think about, but is so huge. And right. And I also will say that I went and spoke with our HR just to kind of review the policy and hear, and our HR here said the other thing is I would encourage you to go and talk to your HR if you need beyond what is given in the policy. I'm not guaranteeing that every HR will give that or be willing, but I also think if you're able to or feel comfortable to having those conversations.
Yeah. And to the point that you've made, you need to create a culture where people can do that they do feel welcome and open and that they're going to be heard.
Yeah, there's a company from a policy perspective that has, it was one of the first that I saw, it's called the Compassionate Leave policy. They have rolling 30 days every year that you can take whenever you want. That's not your PTO, that you can just raise your hand and say, I'm taking compassionate leave for whatever reason. They give a lot of examples beyond bereavement. If bereavement is included in that, they give a lot of reasons, but they also come back and say, your reasons in your life might not fit in this bucket, and whatever they are, we don't need to know about them. You've got this 30-day rolling timeline to take the time that you need for the things that are coming up in your life.
Yeah.
And just saying that and having that, and I had the opportunity to talk with the CEO. That was a big part of helping create that. And it was just all about making sure that their employees felt safe, they felt supported, they felt covered. And it was a great way for them to start the dialogue about, when life hits the fan, here's how we're going to show it for you.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's outstanding. Yeah.
So as we get closer to time at the end of our webinar, I do want to ask, are there, supportive resources and tools out there that can help maybe employers, that can help employees, people that are navigating loss, or to help support someone that is navigating a loss? Start with you, Andrea.
Okay. So some of the things that I would recommend and come to mind. So I work a lot with employee assistance programs. If you're not familiar with your company or group's employee assistance program, definitely become familiar, because beyond the therapy services, which can be utilized when dealing with grief as well, employee assistance programs can help with things such as estate planning, will planning, things like that. So they might be able to provide some guidance in those situations where you're struggling. So definitely know your company's employee assistance program resources. I also would say I'm a big advocate for support groups of any type. Justin might know of some more specific around grief. However, there are tons of online support groups and online platforms where you can find people going through all different types of things. And so it can even be grief specific to losing a child, losing a parent. Looking for those support groups and finding community and connection, I would definitely recommend. And then the one resource that I have worked with for anyone dealing with grief around children in the community is Brooks Place in Indianapolis. So that's another resource that I would recommend.
Very glad you recommended Brooks Place. They're phenomenal. And if you're not if you are not in Indiana, the Brooks Place concept is in most states.
Awesome.
Like off the top of my head, Dougie Center in Oregon is got a great reputation. Also provides a ton of resources on their website, predominantly for children and for families. I mean, I would part of our job as a company is to take a lot of these resources and get them in the right place at the right time for the people that are using our software.
Yeah.
So have dozens of things that I could recommend depending on the situation. But I think, you know, in general, leveraging your EAP, Bereave can do a lot whether you're a customer or not. So we welcome those conversations, of course, and can provide a lot of free resources that are helpful and at least start pointing you in the right direction if we don't do it ourselves.
Yeah, and I did include some of those resources too that you can see on the webinar slide deck. Again, you can access those in the GoToWebinar control panel. Also, the 988 Crisis Lifeline is a really great resource as well. And everyone loves the quiz. I do myself, so I put your bereavement policy quiz on there, as well as how to request an enhancement to the policy, just kind of some tips and tricks that you guys have on your website. Again, you don't have to be a customer to access those.
We hear from people all the time that either use the quiz or use the request, employees going into their HR department with that document to better their policy, and it's worked. So it's a great first step.
And that's how leaders then find out about what you guys do.
Exactly.
So. Well, we are at time for today, so I just want to thank you both so much for your time. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, your contact information is available to them on your screen here. Again, you can access that in the webinar slide documents as well. But thank you so much for sharing your expertise and for sharing your time and energy with us today. So thank you everyone for joining today's webinar event. We'll see you next time. Tune in for our November Wellbeing webinar. So thank you so much.